Oh hey, it's time for another great episode of Josephified History. I'm so excited. You can probably tell, serious woohoo over here.
Now you know how it is, dear Rita. You're basking in the vivacious energy of Switzerland's Got Talent, minding your own business, when a sweet 94-year-old grandma suddenly appears on your screen. She explains that she grew up as an Austrian refugee during the Second World War, and then worked as a spy for the Americans. And that's when she wasn't busy smuggling arms to Italian resistance fighters. But naturally, two much younger musicians emerge from the wings behind her. The kindly-looking nonagenarian stands between them, smiling. You assume that whatever you hear next, it will be a song performed in German that the grandma loved several decades ago. You're relatively sure you know what to expect. And you, cats and kittens, are extremely wrong.
Kultur, unzerstören, Natur. Wir stinken im Dreck.
Just another Tuesday. Who hasn't had that experience, am I right? Gather round, children, and warm your ears for the story of Inge Ginsberg, spy, poet, journalist, 1950s romantic lyricist, and for the final decade of her life, metal band frontwoman.
Intro, clean tone with a hint of reverb.
Born to Fritz and Hildegard, Ingeborg Neufield crashed into the world in January of 1922. Fritz was the most recent owner of an Austria-based freight company that had been freighting all around the world for about 800 years. So life for Inge and her brother Hans was relatively... I need some kind of a... What are the kids saying these days? What's hip? Good at first. Although Inge attended a normal high school, the Neufields employed personal staff in their city residence and weekend villa. Even as a child, Inge noticed that anyone who could play the piano would inevitably become the center of attention at parties, so she began studying music at age 6. This strategy raises questions about the type of party she was attending, friends, because isn't everyone trying to avoid the roaming troubadour with the acoustic guitar? Perhaps it's different if you play the piano. There's generally a lack of roaming, for one thing, and no one had invented the melodica yet.
Verse 1, heavily distorted noise.
Our self-proclaimed Jewish princess had been living her best life. But when Germany invaded Austria and Jews began to suffer persecution, Inge realized that her reality had begun to shift. One night, Nazi paramilitary forces swept the town, forcing her to hide behind a grandfather clock until she could slip away at dawn. On another evening, her family attended the theater, and when they returned to the crib, they discovered that they no longer owned it. The chauffeur betrayed them to the Nazis, and Fritz was sent to Dachau, a concentration camp 10 miles northwest of Munich. Fortunately, Inge had a solution.
Simple, really. I walk right through the front door, bribe the officials in releasing that, and when we catch a bus home.
We cannot overstate how much of a stupid Bananaspans idea this is. These are Nazis, Inge. They'll happily take your money. Then they'll throw you in prison and enslave you for a couple months before they eventually kill you.
Maybe, but I'm thinking it's significantly more likely that I just convince them to do what I want.
That's not even a remote possibility, Inge.
So after that scenario went down exactly the way Inge predicted, Fritz concluded that Austria may no longer be the optimal place for his family. He hopped aboard the MS St. Louis, which was chock full of Jewish refugees headed to the United States. The US and other nearby New World countries were like, new phone, who this? And Fritz was ultimately forced to go back to Europe. In his absence, his 16-year-old daughter temporarily paused her piano practicing and picked up a new hobby, smuggling arms to the partisans.
Okay, but since they'd lost their home and their father had been shipped off to a concentration camp, surely they moved somewhere else in Europe, yeah? They didn't stay in Austria.
They moved, eventually, but the Newfields remained in Vienna for a couple years. Inge's brother Hans snagged employment as a gravedigger, as did Otto Kollmann, her boyfriend and future first husband. Gravediggers were considered essential workers, friends. The family had some level of protection, but by 1942, persecution had grown so intense that Mama Hildegard believed if they did not bolt for the exits, they wouldn't survive. She sold her jewelry collection to an Austrian count. In turn, he smuggled her, Inge, Hans, and Kollmann into Switzerland. The journey apparently involved crossing over the mountains on foot at some point over a period of several days.
Because espionage career.
Inge's family attempted to settle at various refugee camps around Switzerland. By 1944, Kollmann found himself singing songs at the Café Federale in Lugano as the regular crowd shuffled in. Then, the Office of Strategic Services, an organization that later became the CIA, slid into the Piano Man's DMs and went,
"Yo, you speak German, right? Want to become a spy for us?
That's on stop, bro.
Hey, we're looking for some mad honeys to help us out too. You know anyone like that?"
Inge might not have been officially employed prior to that point, but her social schedule was packed. Life is complicated when you're a teenager, spending half your time smuggling weapons into a war zone and the other half smuggling wounded soldiers out of that war zone. At least one high-ranking official in the Swiss army knew about both efforts and never attempted to stop her. Now, on her boyfriend's recommendation, the OSS was offering her a position at Villa Westphal, a diplomatic safehouse used by resistance fighters. Most of the villa's residents were Americans, although it also aided resistance fighters in an Italian word I cannot pronounce. Although officially a housekeeper, Inge's real responsibility was to deliver messages from the resistance to the OSS. Her future friend and bandmate, Pedro da Silva, claims that Inge played an integral part of Operation Sunrise. She decided that...
Hold up, what's Operation Sunrise?
Here's the problem, and this is something that I often encounter during Josephified history, y'all. Operation Sunrise is also really interesting. I actually ended up with as many pages of notes about that as I did about Inge herself. And if I go too deeply into the weeds here, it is going to distract from our favorite death metal grandma.
I'm picking up what you're putting down, but you can't simply mention what sounds like a badass classified mission and then refuse to provide any explanation.
That's fair. Basically, in 1943, the Nazis were experiencing some issues. The Allies kept bombing their supplies, and the Italian resistance continually beat the stuffing out of them.
Pepe's become kind of a...
At the same time, everyone believed that the war was winding down, and many agencies in the United States predicted the OSS would cease to be relevant once that occurred. The OSS chief placed pressure on his subordinates to drum up huge dramatic wins under the assumption that if they were loud and showy enough, the agency would be seen as too valuable to shutter. So Alan Dulles, an obnoxiously inept OSS director who later went on to a spectacularly disastrous tenure as head of the CIA, secretly cut a deal with Karl Wolff, a high-ranking Nazi commander. Dulles agreed to allow German forces in northern Italy, and only northern Italy, to surrender. In return, the director would use his influence to protect the German commanders when they were inevitably tried for war crimes. Have you watched The Wire, dear reader? Critically ignored during its run, but now generally considered one of the best programs ever made, it's well worth your time. If you have, you'll remember that in the third season, Major Bunny Colvin quietly offers the local drug dealers an arrangement.
Now you move your people into any designated area I told you about, and you'll have immunity from arrest and prosecution. You're free to make your drops, collect what need collecting, won't nobody bother you. You got my word on it.
What do you get out of this?
That's a fair question. I want to salvage what's still worth salvaging in my district. And I can't do that with a bunch of young hoppers running around scaring the hell out of decent people.
That is essentially Sunrise. The arrangement was illegal for several reasons, and also kick-started tensions between the US and the Soviet Union, since the Soviets eventually learned about the meeting and were furious that they were not consulted.
So Operation Sunrise wasn't something to highlight on a resume.
It depends on your perspective. For several parties, Sunrise worked out quite well. The truce released a portion of Italy from German control and likely saved some priceless Italian cultural treasures like Da Vinci's Last Supper in Milan from destruction.
Of course, the war's over. So no!
With World War II wrapped up, our heroine's days were no longer filled with running weapons into combat zones and spying on soldiers. She married Coleman, had a child, and relocated to Zurich, where the two began to build their musical careers. A few years in, they were hired as composers for a Swiss distribution company I cannot pronounce. As far as I am able to determine, dear reader, that company contracted with film producers and record labels at one end and musicians willing to write original work for those industries at the other. Somehow, probably through supernatural bargaining, because I can't conceive of another way that this would even be possible, Coleman wrote 10 songs per week.
Kev, tell me, what is it that you truly desire?
By 1955, Capitol Records has set their all-seeing eye on the Colemans and lured them to Hollywood. Yngwie and Otto quickly found themselves in high demand, with singers like Dean Martin, Doris Day, and Nat King Cole recording their work.
You hear today's Try Again, which was a big hit with Dean Martin.
And that's why.
But before long, both were miserable.
After a while, I got very tired of this Hollywood life. It is all fake.
Otto had initially believed he would pay his dues by writing pop music until he became established, and then would have enough industry cred to do what he actually wanted, write symphonies.
Ah, the John Mayer trap. Build your name on a profitable style of music you don't truly enjoy, then attempt to launch a second career in your preferred genre, and finally realize you'll never be able to switch because too many execs have become too rich from the first version of you.
Yngwie didn't embrace the whole symphony idea. For one thing, she was primarily a lyricist. What could she contribute to a symphony? Her marriage to Otto splintered. Towards the end, she delivered an ultimatum. If he didn't compose the music to accompany the lyrics she had just finished, she'd divorce him. Otto refused, and true to her word, Yngwie announced their marriage was over. That song, kids, was Yngwie's version of what would later become Que Sera Sera. You might have heard of it.
Will I be rich? Here's what she